And we start off, if you have a Bible, I invite you to open it up to Matthew chapter 18. And Matthew chapter 18, and it's a conversation that starts this little parable that we're going to look at, this little story. Jesus was a master storyteller. I was telling somebody this morning, he was absolutely masterful in how he told his stories. You know how a good teller of a joke will go, this happened to the first person, and they said no. It happened to the second person, they said no. It happened to the third person, they said yes, and everybody laughs, right? That's the formula for a good joke. Well, Jesus is a master storyteller, and it starts off in Matthew chapter 18, and it's a frame story. What I mean by that is you start off with the beginning of a conversation, then you go into the parable, then you come back out of the conversation, and Jesus speaks directly to us. Chapter 18, starting in verse 23, and here's the occasion for the story that we're going to read, the parable that we're going to read. Jesus and Peter are having a direct conversation, and Peter asks Jesus this. He says, let me ask you. Obviously, he's had some relational challenges or some conflict with somebody, or he's not getting along with somebody. He says, let me ask you, how many times do I need to forgive a brother or sister who has sinned against me? 7 times? Because obviously in that culture, there had been some teaching that if you can just forgive somebody 7 times and you get to that 8th time, you don't have to forgive anymore. And so Jesus gives this phenomenal response, and then he responds even further with a parable. And look at what he says. Jesus answered him, saying, I say to you, not 7 times, but 70 times. In other words, some of your Bibles may say not 7 times, but 7 times 70. The idea here is an infinite amount we are supposed to forgive people. And he says this, he says, well, let me just go ahead and tell you a story. Let me illustrate what I mean by forgiveness. And so he starts off in verse 25 there, and here's what he says. He says, therefore, in other words, here's a practical story with some practical implication. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven, in Matthew, he's always talking about the kingdom of heaven. Chapters 5 through 7, we've looked at the Sermon on the Mount. That's his key teaching on what the kingdom of heaven is like. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like, so he's going to give a story, a simile. It's like a king who wanted to settle matters with his servants. Now, you got to understand, I'm going to tell you kind of this story from a modern day kind of vantage point, okay? So you have a king. In our day and age, that would be like the CEO, the head guy of a company. You got a head guy of the company, and he wanted to settle accounts, which means that it's like tax season. It's like, I got to figure out who do I owe and who owes me. We got to settle accounts because we got to pay Caesar's IRS some money probably from our company. Probably he's the king over a large land mass or an area that's an agricultural area, but he's the top dude. He's the CEO. And so it says that as he began, next verse, as he began to settle the accounts, a man was brought to him who owed him 1,000 bags of gold. Now let me just kind of share this with you. So it's time to do the accounting, and you've got the main CEO guy, and you got to understand, he's a guy who was brought to this CEO, and he owes him 1,000 bags of gold, and he cannot pay it back. So you have to understand, the CEO is going to have all this accounting, and somebody owes him 1,000 bags of gold. That is like saying an infinitesimal amount, okay? That is like taking the top amount in their culture known to them at that time, and then Jesus pluralizes that to show how much of a debt this guy really genuinely owed. And so you have to understand, that's like for us, that's like saying $1 zillion. That's like saying, hey, this guy owes like more than the national debt, more than the trade deficit, more than probably your mortgage, okay? So this is a huge amount of money when he says he owes 1,000 bags of gold to this man, and he can't pay. And so you have to understand, it is time for reckoning. It is the day of accounting. We've got to get everything straight. And so if somebody owes me money, I need to get it straight. And so this CEO is going to bring everybody into a meeting. All the vice presidents of the company are getting together, and the major shareholders and the department heads and All the people who have a stake in this company are coming together for this reckoning day. And then it says that this guy can't pay his money, okay? And so probably everybody in the company has heard, oh my gosh, this guy, he's embezzled money from the company, right? And so this is a guy who's a vice president that has this kind of his hand in the cookie jar. He's a guy that likes to live with lots of luxuries, but he can't afford them, and so he's just been progressively embezzling over months and probably years from this CEO and from this company. This is a guy who was probably trained from the ground up. This is the CEO probably gave this guy his first chance. This is a guy who had a lot of things entrusted to him, and from the ground up, he's climbed the ladder to now be very much in charge of part of the company. This is a guy who has broken trust, who has stolen money, and now it's his reckoning day.